At 9, one of the final barriers in the U.S. military is about to be broken, and some say it could lead to trouble. For years, women have not been able to serve on submarines, and that is now going to change.
The year is 2010, and the U.S. Navy just made a new announcement that would change the course of history. After decades of disputes and claims, the Navy finally pulled the trigger, allowing a crew of women to board the USS Wyoming.
Get your You need your boat picked up yet?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet.
We're looking for an opportunity here to make our way down towards the south. You got our beams pointed out west to. Cells and each of the other for all aspects of operation of the submarine are the nearest he is engaged with ground responsibility. Privileges. There's a submarine mitigation for the balance of submarine destruction in operation, having demonstrated their only employment check mode on submarines. Back down the mizzen mast. Break the mainsail. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna leave those atoms.
Power down 2, 2, and 3.
Power down 2, 2, and 3. All right. Watch deck. Or go see up 3. Watch deck.
But this was not just a changing of the guard. It was an actual change in policy that dates back more than a century. Yes, for a century, the U.S. Navy banned women from entering submarines. And this made a lot of sense. So, why would the Navy change this policy? Is it political pressure under the Obama administration? Or is there something else we don't know about? What about the scandal involving men videotaping women in the showers? And finally, should women actually be on a submarine? Join us as we unravel this mystery and take a look at what
January of 2016, the Navy implemented having female enlisted go on submarines. I think it's the stupidest fucking decision ever.
Since the dawn of submarines in the late 1800s, no country ever wanted to deploy women on board. In fact, the United States received its first submarine, the USS Holland, in 1900, and since setting sail, women would never be allowed on board. But why exactly? Well, various reasons have popped up over the years, but it is important that we look at all of them and discuss whether these are merely myths or if they have some merit to them. First, there is a moral issue. One of the first ever reasons given, dating back almost a century, is how the presence of women would affect the morale of other mariners. Since women were often seen in the kitchen, cleaning homes, and bearing children back in the early 20th century, they were never seen as actually useful in times of war. The narrative surrounding morale would continue throughout the decades, with many navies claiming that women aboard one of these ships would be very controversial and could possibly turn into a distraction. This made a lot of sense, given the fact that females were never accepted as professionals in the old working environments of the world. Secondly, there is the issue of privacy. Depending on the type of man you are, you generally believe that women should have their own privacy and that they need a little more comfort than men. Women need privacy when getting dressed and washing. Well, that becomes another very important issue. Moreover, women also have various needs that need to be addressed. For example, adding different toiletries to accommodate their needs on long deployments will be very important to ensure that everyone on board doesn't need to deal with these sanitary issues. But these are not really issues that the Navy likes to admit, and they often just avoided the topic. Well, this was until former British Defense Secretary Philip Hammond was confronted and needed to give information to the media. This followed an 18-month study by the Royal Navy in which they considered legal, operational, health, social, technical, and financial elements that would all need to be accounted for when women board a submarine. However, when asked about the reason women were excluded, he cited reasons that were none of the above. In fact, the Royal Navy didn't allow women to enter submarines due to higher levels of carbon dioxide that supposedly have a far more negative effect on men than they do on women. The Navy peddled this story for the better part of a century, and it would also be echoed by many British allies. Following a study done by the Institute of Naval Medicine, they concluded that these claims of carbon dioxide were completely unfounded, and that it should not be enough reason to prevent women from boarding a submarine if they so choose. Following the study, Defense Secretary Hammond came out at the end of 2011, where he had the following to say: "I am pleased that women will now have the same opportunity to serve on board our submarines, carrying out vital tasks, maintaining Britain's defenses around the clock, across the world." The Royal Navy has always been at the forefront of innovation, and this decision represents another step in its distinguished tradition of recognizing the contribution of its people and making the very best use of the talent from which it can recruit. These words were further echoed by Second Sea Lord, Vice Admiral Charles Montgomery. Our primary objective in the Royal Navy is maintaining our operational effectiveness both now and in the future. This carefully considered decision will allow the submarine service to draw on the widest range of talent and skills of our people, those in service and those yet to join. It will therefore enable us to further consolidate our operational success, and it will give our women the same opportunities as men to enjoy a fulfilling and rewarding career in the submarine service. On the other side of the pond, the United States took a far more antagonistic approach toward women. Their assessment of the situation was mostly focused on the logistics of the situation, in which they stated that the space available might not be conducive to creating a functional environment for women to enter a submarine. Moreover, the Navy also fears the medical risks, similar to what the British Royal Navy echoed earlier. However, this was nothing to do with carbon dioxide, but rather the risk of pregnancy. The United States believed that women have to undergo more frequent medical assessments than men, and this will not only be costly, but require more medical supplies to be added to the submarine. In fact, should a woman become pregnant on one of these missions, it could theoretically derail all mission plans. Finally, the United States also cited psychological reasons, stating that operating a submarine is an extremely stressful environment, and this could have some adverse psychological effects on the women. These issues would prevent women from entering submarines for decades. But as the turn of the century arrived, and more women proved themselves worthy and capable, the Navy had to reassess the situation to see whether or not women might now be ready for military service aboard a submarine. The USS Wyoming and its female crew members would be the first to break the status quo. The USS Wyoming, SSBN 742, is one of the more modern submarines. Commissioned in 1996, it is an Ohio-class submarine and the fourth U.S. naval vessel to carry the name Wyoming. She would sail the oceans for more than a decade, carrying ballistic missiles and a highly trained crew, before the announcement in 2010 was made that women would now be allowed to enter the vessel. 24 women were initially recruited by the Navy, and after a couple weeks of training, they were introduced to 4 submarines. The USS Wyoming, USS Ohio, USS Georgia, and USS Maine would be the vessels in question. These women were deployed in teams of 3 or 4, where they would share living quarters, with no men being allowed. Moreover, the bathroom situation was set up with a reversible sign. The sign would allow other crew members to know that a woman was currently using the facility. Everyone would immediately be happy that women would now be used aboard these vessels. But then something expected and quite concerning happened. By 2014, the news would break that a dozen men on the submarine had been implicated in producing videos of female officers using the showers. Yes, you heard that right. Women were actually videotaped in the showers aboard the USS Wyoming. But even more disconcerting is the fact that these videos were distributed among the sailors. Later, the investigation revealed that it was just one person who was responsible for taking the footage, and 11 others who watched it, but failed to report it to the admiral in charge. This was what a senior naval officer had to say about the ordeal following investigations. "This was not 11 guys, each with different cameras," said the source. "It was really one guy doing the videography piece and then sharing it with other people. We think the 7 videos were shot with a cell phone." This would spark a lot of controversy, especially following the words of Vice Admiral Michael Connor, who said the following: "The performance of these women and the crews to which they are assigned have been overwhelmingly successful." By 2015, the case was finally finished, and of the 12 sailors, many had been court-martialed, receiving sentences that ranged from discharge from the Navy. At least 2 were sentenced to short jail terms, and many would lose their rank. The case was eventually closed, but it could have been far worse, given the fact that women are and should be protected in the modern world. As stated by many admirals, women can use these unisex showers and will often just put up a sign that indicates that a woman is currently using it. Filming the women was completely uncalled for, although no one truly knows exactly why. But despite all this, many experts still believe that women should not work on submarines, often citing various reasons that draw out the ire of those who are pro-women in the Navy. According to those who serve in the Navy and have some experience aboard these vessels for months, it is important to understand the level of distraction this can cause, and it eventually turns into a major psychological issue. Since both men and women have basic needs and are attracted to one another, it could theoretically cause a lot of problems, but this is not only what you'd expect. In fact, the most logical thing your brain might go to is when the officers engage in certain conduct that can be frowned upon. But as the Navy officers say, it comes from both sides, and after 60 days at sea, anyone could become attractive, which leads to potential situations of distractions that affect the work. Moreover, situations of love triangles could also arise, and when you have this kind of drama, it will naturally disrupt the complete flow of the work being done. Who wants to deal with 2 naval officers who are constantly badgering one another and fighting over a woman? Anyone with a logical mind can see how much of a distraction this will cause. Even though submarines are only deployed for up to 90 days, things like an unexpected pregnancy could quickly spiral out of control. The second valid point made is that working on a submarine can be very stressful. Tempers often flare as people begin to lose their cool, and some sailors have suggested that women would find it hard to work in such a hostile environment. But this goes even deeper, suggesting that a powerful camaraderie has formed between these crew members, and this is something that men don't often want women to be a big part of. Essentially, the sentiment being raised is that women do not find it comfortable or even functional to work in these environments, and might not be able to adjust or even acclimatize to such conditions. Nevertheless, the deployment of women would continue, and thanks to some resilience, this happened just a few years later in 2022. By 2022, it was revealed that an all-female crew had departed on the USS Wyoming. However, this was later revealed that it was actually a mixed crew, but it was the first time 15 women had simultaneously been deployed aboard a U.S. submarine. The patrol mission was largely successful and would break down even more barriers, suggesting that perhaps the Navy could be looking at an all-female crew to eventually be used for the mission. Following the Biden administration and its powerful DEI drive, more and more women found themselves being selected for various submarine missions, leading to the introduction of the USS New Jersey, a supposed all-female submarine that will be commissioned in 2028. Despite this Virginia-class submarine having all the features of its counterparts, it is specifically designed for women and men to coexist. For example, doors will be integrated, separating the sleeping quarters of each gender. Moreover, 2 toilets and bathrooms will be installed to ensure that privacy is fully maintained throughout the deployment. Some of the other changes are minor, but make it a lot more comfortable for women. For example, overhead compartments are lowered to accommodate shorter women, and steps will be added to the bunk bed system. Finally, stacked laundry machines will also be used to ensure that everything remains clean. In all honesty, the level of female submariners might result in this submarine being used for only a female crew. So, for the first time in U.S. history, a full female crew will be piloting the vessel and conducting various missions around the world. Whether this is a good decision remains to be seen when it finally hits the oceans in 2028. It is also worth noticing that the initial date of commission should have been October 2024. However, subpar welding efforts and various other problems pertaining to the construction would result in the delay of the project by a further 4 years. This will likely be a missile-guided submarine powered by nuclear turbines that ensure power is always available on the ship. So, the big question is whether women should actually be deployed on submarines, or if surface vessels are much better. Depending on who you ask, you might be met with different answers. For the most part, older submariners are completely against the idea. Most men believe that the demands women require aboard these submarines are absolutely ridiculous and could have adverse effects on the mission outcomes. It also suggests that women will likely need to be treated differently, which completely disrupts the synergy of the crew. When a captain needs to be more kind to one crew member while the others are treated more adversely, it could lead to emotional troubles arising on these vessels. Moreover, the drive for sexual needs to be fulfilled is a major concern. And following the news that broke of crew members videotaping women in the showers would further disrupt any camaraderie in these crews. But there is an upside to having women aboard these vessels. For the most part, women pay far more attention to detail, and it is this attention to detail that could theoretically make a big difference. Women tend to take more care in doing their tasks, and this reduces the number of slip-ups that often happen in these highly stressful environments. But if this is the route the U.S. Navy chooses, we must look at what the future of submariners looks like, and whether or not there are more design changes that will make it far more comfortable for women aboard a submarine. With a military budget of just under $1 trillion, the United States has a lot of money to spend on the Navy. The USS New Jersey might just be the first to promote more and more women to join the Navy. If these vessels can continue to implement some kind of protective measures, like different showers, toilets, and sleeping compartments, they can easily ensure that both men and women live comfortably aboard a submarine, and any other naval vessel for that matter. Unfortunately, a submarine will always be uncomfortable, and due to size constraints, it is almost impossible to add some of the extra features you can find aboard surface vessels. For example, United States Navy destroyers and aircraft carriers now have systems like shops and even a Starbucks in place to focus on quality of life features. As more of these quality of life features become important, it might spark even more demand to make the living conditions for women aboard submarines more comfortable. But that is a story for another day, and we would love to see some of your comments on this topic. Do you think women should be allowed on submarines, or do the conditions make this a male-only job? In fact, this doesn't have anything to do with pay, and women can find different jobs aboard surface vessels that pay much better. So, let us know what you think, and make sure you are subscribed to our channel for all your military curiosities.